James, honey, did something happen to you? After we got separated in that long hallway? Are you confusing me with someone else? You were always so forgetful. Remember that time in the hotel? You said you took everything, but you forgot that videotape we made. I wonder if it's still there. I'm not your Mary.
Silent Hill 2 remains one of the most iconic and mysterious horror games in history, with fans still discussing its meaning over 2 decades later. But here's the thing, you don't know the meaning of Silent Hill 2, but neither do I.
What?
Okay, I can already hear the typing of disgruntled fingers down there in the comment section. Let me explain before you finish typing up that comment of yours, which I'm sure was going to come out level-headed and reasonable. Unless you've been living under a rock for the past year, you've most likely seen the announcement and subsequent release of the Silent Hill 2 remake by Bloober Team. And hopefully you haven't been subject to the painfully obnoxious discourse surrounding the anticipation of the remake. But if you have, I'm sorry to say the release of the game hasn't changed much. The discourse surrounding it is still pretty moronic. On one end of the extreme, you have people who hated the remake from the moment it was announced because of early marketing material which depicted a very different presentation than what we got on release. Yet despite Bloober's revision of the game, making it a bit more in line with the original, these people still hate it. For various reasons, some valid and some just, how do I put this, completely brain dead. And on the other hand, you have the group of people who never seem to learn how their recency bias makes them believe anything new that comes out is the best thing ever made. These people are personally offended by criticism of their new shiny toy and consider the practice of critique sacrilegious. Both of these extreme groups will probably hate me by the end of this video, assuming they make it that far before rage quitting. Oh, and sorry, I forgot one little group of people. These are the refined society who are highly opinionated on the original Silent Hill 2, despite never having played it or even watched a playthrough. Nobody likes these people. But despite any difference in opinions we might have, what most of you don't realize is that Bloober's Silent Hill 2 is not an upgrade of the original classic. Nor is it a downgrade. It was never really a remake at all. It is a sequel disguised as a remake. The way that it reimagines Silent Hill's narrative and the delivery of that narrative shows me that it is not attempting to replace the original, but rather tell a new story by revisiting a classic. Despite looking similar on the surface, using the same characters, roughly the same plot, story, and revelations, Bloober's Silent Hill 2 offers a completely different narrative experience than the original. Bloober realized something a lot of studios probably would have failed to. You can't remake Silent Hill 2 for a modern gaming audience. You can only reinterpret it for them. Ambiguity in interpretation is at the heart of the original Silent Hill 2, and is what mainly contributes to its strong dreamlike atmosphere. Heavily inspired by the works of David Lynch, Silent Hill 2 creates its meaning similarly to Lynch's works. Both use mystery, subtlety, and ambiguity to create a foggy dream for the audience to interpret and make meaning of. From the abstract visuals of enemies and locations, to the physical performance of its characters, and even the delivery of the voice acting, Silent Hill 2 lives in the uncertainty of dreams. Changing the core building blocks of a dream inherently changes the experience and meaning an audience might derive from it, putting into question whether the remake's intention was ever to upgrade or even replace the original game at all. Tonight we will explore the dream or nightmare that is Silent Hill 2 and Bloober Team's reinterpretation. With your hosts, Ram and the Lamb. Spoilers ahead, and viewer discretion is advised. What would happen if you took away the fog from Silent Hill? Well, you would just be left with Hill. I think we can agree that the fog in Silent Hill is a core tenet of its design. Remove it, and you are left with no atmosphere, no dread, and no mystery. Max Durad in his video Silent Hill Mythology, The Fog World and the Other World puts forward a great interpretation of the significance of the fog in Silent Hill games. In that video, he explains that the fog world in Silent Hill blurs the boundaries between dreams and realities. Official documents describe the town's transitions between different worlds, comparing them to the different sleep cycles. The fog can be seen as a manifestation of the mind, representing the way the town takes unconscious thoughts and makes them physical. If we interpret the fog to represent the subconscious mind, obscuring thoughts and reality, then Silent Hill's use of ambiguity is a narrative tool that does the exact same thing. Remove the ambiguity from Silent Hill and you will be left with a soulless husk. I would argue ambiguity is as important, if not even more critical to Silent Hill's identity than the fog. Ambiguity is not just a random narrative tool in Silent Hill the same way the town's fog is not just a random artistic decision in the second game of the series. Both are at the core of the experience. You will often hear fans of the original Silent Hill state that the game has a rich, dreamlike atmosphere and presentation. One look at the original and it won't take long for you to see exactly how dreamlike it is, from the way characters talk to each other.
I'm kind of lost.
Lost?
To the way the game shifts between worlds without warning. The town of Silent Hill acts as a mirror to James's subconscious, transforming his inner turmoil into a physical reality. Dreams do the exact same thing, functioning as reflections of our subconscious being made into what can essentially be understood as movies we experience as we dream, or in the case of lucid dreaming, dream worlds that we explore and interact with. In the interpretation of dreams by Sigmund Freud, he claims that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. Freud proposed that many aspects of our unconscious mind, including repressed memories, traumas, or unresolved conflicts, manifest in dreams as distorted or symbolic representations of those feelings. In Silent Hill, those aspects of the unconscious mind don't just take a symbolic form of visions in a dream. Instead, they take a literal form capable of interacting with flesh and blood.
See? I'm real.
I think it should be clear how the idea of dreams manifesting the subconscious is directly comparable to how the town of Silent Hill transforms James's repressed guilt into tangible forms like monsters and distorted environments. Dreams are ambiguous. It's not always clear what their meaning is, like when you dream about falling. It could represent a fear of heights, loss of control, or any number of things. Ambiguity creates uncertainty, which creates horror. A smile is not unsettling or disturbing normally, but when a smile is neither evil nor good and exists in this uncertain middle ground, well, now you begin to get Lynchian.
He's dead.
It is no secret that Team Silent, the original Silent Hill 2 devs, were heavily inspired by the works of David Lynch. I mean, a lot of games are inspired by Lynch. Bro's work is so influential, we use his name as an adjective. But while I often hear Twin Peaks discussed as an inspiration for Silent Hill 2, I solemnly hear about the influence that Lynch's movies had on the game, namely Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive. With any of these movies I bring up, you really should just rent them and give them a watch. In the interest of time, I'm going to be speaking as if you've watched the movies and spoiling them when necessary, so you've been warned. Lost Highway is an especially large inspiration for the plot of Silent Hill 2. I mean, both pieces of media center on men haunted by their traumatic past and the crime it led them to commit, namely the murder of their wives. Both men subconsciously bury the dark reality of their actions in some sort of fugue state. Both men encounter women who look identical to their respective wives, except hotter, or more accurately, an idealized and hypersexualized version of their wives. Both men are haunted by a morally ambiguous supernatural figure who pushes them into bringing their sins out of a subconscious denial and into consciousness. And finally, both men realize their delusion, sorta, after watching a tape of their heinous sin. I think the similarities speak for themselves. But what is more interesting is how both pieces of media use ambiguity to create their horror. Lost Highway is often cited as one of Lynch's more confusing works. I tend to disagree with that assessment. I think it would be more accurate to say, Lost Highway uses abstraction and ambiguity to a greater degree than some of his other works. Despite having a pretty similar premise to Mulholland Drive, namely with dream realities, Lost Highway stood in my head longer. Lost Highway uses ambiguity as a central storytelling device, crafting a narrative that blurs the line between reality and fantasy, much like dreams. It leaves significant gaps in objective truth for your mind to interpret. This ambiguity is not simply for confusion's sake. It is a deliberate tool used to place the audience in the position of a detective, analyzing clues, interpreting symbols, and trying to draw meaning from the gaps in the concrete markers of the story using their intuition.
I'm very interested in logic, but there's logic, it goes toward abstraction. There can be logical things that are abstract. I really love intuition. I love intuition. And to me, what they told me is intuition is the intellect and emotions swimming together. It's like a knowingness.
The role our intuition takes when interpreting abstraction is a large part of what makes Lynch's movies so timeless and endlessly rewarding to interpret. Abstraction creates ambiguity, and ambiguity invites interpretation. The mystery man's existence is never given a concrete explanation. Is he a supernatural entity? A manifestation of Fred's guilt? Or, my personal interpretation, a manifestation of Fred's incel judgment? Lynch offers no objective answers, only the unsettling presence of this figure who seems to defy the rules of time and space. This abstraction creates ambiguity. Instead of providing an objective answer by having the mystery man go on a prolonged monologue of who he really is, Lynch uses the mystery man to evoke a sense of dread and unease, leaving the audience to interpret the abstraction, to interpret the surreal.
When things are concrete, very few variations in interpretation. But the more abstract a thing gets, the more varied the interpretations. But people still know inside what it is for them. And even if they don't trust their intuition, I always say that if some girl named Sally, she comes out of the theater, I don't have a clue what that means. She goes over with Bob and Jim to get a cup of coffee. Bob starts talking about what he thinks it is, because he knows exactly what it is. He starts talking. 5 seconds later, Sally is saying, no, it's not that. And all these things comes out of Sally. So Sally really did know for herself. That's the beauty of it. It's just like life. You see the same things, but you come up with many, many different things as you go along as a detective.
Silent Hill 2 is no different in this regard. The game utilizes abstraction, which encourages you to stare into the abyss and find out what faces you start to see in the darkness. A well-known example of this is the abstract creature designs throughout the game. Let's take the lying figure enemies as an example, because, quite frankly, I love these things. These pitiful creatures appear humanoid, but their bodies are helplessly bound, their arms twisted and trapped within a flesh membrane. They attack James in a restrained yet violent manner, oozing black pus from their hellish cocoon. Exactly what do these creatures represent? Are they a symbol of James's repressed guilt and emotional torment? Do they symbolize a straitjacket and therefore represents James' mental state? Well, their design is somewhat sexual and reminiscent of bondage. Are they symbol of James's repressed sexual desires? Or do they represent Mary's sickness, hence the black, sickly ooze? Is this how James sees Mary because of her sickness? Well, we also see a lying figure wearing James's clothes dead in an alleyway. Did all the lying figures we kill used to be different versions of James? There's no definitive answer, and that's what makes the game so interesting. The lying figures, like Lynch's abstractions in Lost Highway, act as a visual symbol that prompts us to reflect and interpret. The symbols serve as seeds, allowing us to explore multiple interpretations based on our own emotional and intellectual responses. In both the works of David Lynch and Silent Hill 2, abstraction isn't just a random choice. It's a fundamental aspect of the art's identity.
But if Silent Hill 2 is like a dream filled with abstractions, then can't Silent Hill 2 mean anything and everything? Doesn't it lose all meaning?
Well, no, because there are concrete details in dreams you can observe as well as ambiguous abstractions to interpret. Wait, you can talk? Listen, I'm not saying that you can reasonably claim that Silent Hill 2 was about a divorced man busting it down sexual style after dumping his wife for her flirtatious twin sister. Much like Dreams, the game combines both concrete elements and abstract mysteries. These two things are not mutually exclusive. You can have both at the same time. There are clear facts in many people's dreams. Certain events, objects, or actions are grounded in a representation of reality. For example, let's say you had a dream that you were being chased by a figure with a pyramid on its head in a dark corridor. Well, based on that description, there are concrete details there beyond question. You're clearly in a dingy corridor. There's clearly a figure chasing you, and he clearly has a triangle on his head. That's not up for debate. There are clear objective markers which tell you what is happening. But now if I asked you what the dream meant or represented, you might have wildly different answers. To some, it might mean that they're paranoid of being stalked. For others, it might mean they're running away from a dark past. Or maybe they're just scared of geometry. The objective markers that the dream presents act as a seed, and around that seed is a thick layer of fog which abstracts the image through ambiguity. From that seed blossoms diverse interpretations from the audience. Silent Hill is no different in this sense. As an audience, we know that James has received a letter from his dead wife, Mary, and travels to Silent Hill in search of her. We know that he meets a woman named Maria, who looks almost identical to Mary but has a starkly different personality. As the game progresses, we know that the letter James received from his wife shows that there was no writing on it at all. Eventually, the letter completely disappears, and finally, the envelope itself vanishes as the player and James reach closer to the truth. These are objective markers in the story. Much like Dreams, the game combines both concrete elements and abstract mysteries. Why did the envelope disappear? How did James receive the letter in the first place? These questions are not given objective answers in the original game, and that ambiguity is coded into the entire story. It is a big part of what makes Silent Hill 2 so interesting and horrifying. It is the same reason why Dreams are so interesting. The concrete elements in Silent Hill 2 ground the story and provide a framework for its more abstract themes to flourish without devolving into random symbols. So then, knowing this about the original Silent Hill 2, does the remake retain the same level of ambiguity and dream-like atmosphere?
How do you know about that? Aren't you Maria?
Well, like most discussions relating to remakes, it's a little complicated, but I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible. There are 3 critical creative choices that make up the ambiguity of the original Silent Hill 2. By no means is this a comprehensive list, but I don't know about you, but I don't want to be stuck in this little box for longer than a feature film. Number 1. Lore ambiguity. A key aspect of Silent Hill 2's enduring legacy is its ability to balance the known and the unknown. This creative choice is basically how many objective markers does the audience receive about the world or characters in the game. So for example, the objective answer that Mary is indeed dead and not just taking a nap in the back seat of James's car. Another example from the original game is the origins of Pyramid Head. The game heavily implies that Pyramid Head manifests in the way he does because of a picture James sees in the absolute best area in the entire game, the Silent Hill Historical Society. This building first appears to be a museum created by a society which has dedicated itself to commemorating the history of Silent Hill. James can find different paintings and pictures of increasingly disturbing subjects across the museum, eventually coming across what looks like a gap in reality and an interdimensional gateway into what we can only assume is hell. After descending for what feels like hours, James seems to end up in a decrepit prison, buried deep within the town, or perhaps buried beneath the lake. But despite the environment taking an impossible turn, James comes across relics of the Historical Society museum that should not be here, and eventually he comes across this picture. There's a clan joke somewhere in here, but I'm honestly too spooked to think of it. Cult horror never really gets to me. But this moment and this whole area just works because of the way it gets my mind racing with possible meanings. Did James encounter the picture during a previous visit to Silent Hill, perhaps during his honeymoon, and now that he is being judged, manifest this executioner-looking guy as Pyramid Head? But why would this picture only resurface in his memory after he killed his wife? Is Pyramid Head simply a manifestation of James's psyche? Or does the cult of Silent Hill have some role in its creation, since Pyramid Head looks like one of their cult members? Or maybe this picture was never real, and is instead James's psyche projecting Pyramid Head's appearance onto the picture? These questions are never definitively answered, and it's that very ambiguity that makes Pyramid Head feel otherworldly, and something we can never fully unravel. And as I've been saying, this balance of clear facts with interpretive gaps is integral to the horror of Silent Hill 2. Now in the remake, Bloober Team preserves most of the lore ambiguity. They pretty much follow the plot and lore details of the original pretty closely without changing too much. But the remake does take small steps towards providing objective answers in other parts of the lore. One notable change involves the illness that would have led to Mary's death. In the original game, the nature of her sickness is left pretty vague. We only see her symptoms, such as a persistent cough and her skin condition. However, in the remake, we can find a receipt for medications in an early game apartment section. The medications found on this receipt are not real per se, but rather are thinly veiled stand-ins for real-world drugs. Many of these medications pointing directly to treatments for blood cancers and anxiety disorders. This shift, while minute, nudges the player towards a more definitive understanding of Mary's condition, specifically suggesting she may have had some form of blood cancer. In the original, Mary's illness was implied to be respiratory and skin-related, but there was never really any confirmation on the specific type of illness she had. And honestly, I'm not sure knowing that fact adds anything to the story. The illness itself was a narrative tool, which could be interpreted as a symbol of unpredictable strain that can plague a marriage. The illness reflected the famous Protestant marital vows, which reads as follows: I, Ram, take thee to be my wedded, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. By keeping Mary's illness vague, the original game allowed the illness to function as a broader symbol for terminal illness disrupting a marriage, rather than a specific medical diagnosis. But in the remake, with these medications hinting at a more specific illness, it edges closer to confirmation. shifting the focus away from symbolic interpretation and towards literal fact. Honestly, this edition is a bit of a lose-lose situation if the remake was trying to, remake the original game. Because this receipt doesn't outwardly confirm Mary's illness was a type of blood cancer, but it heavily suggests so. It's clear that Bloober did not want to confirm what specific type of illness it was, since they use implication here rather than outright stating it. So, if you think giving a definitive answer to this mystery in the original is a bad idea, then you are acknowledging that ambiguity is a key aspect of the Silent Hill 2 formula. And if you agree that ambiguity is essential to Silent Hill 2 and what gives it its identity, why would you endorse a narrative addition that gets very close to confirming the answer to this mystery? Also, if her condition is a blood cancer, why does Maria cough in her ending? The rationale behind this addition is confusing. Me being not so subtly told that Mary's disease was a type of blood cancer doesn't transform the narrative enough to be interesting, yet simultaneously lessens the ambiguity that makes the symbolic identity of the original. In other words, it's, at best, a redundant lore addition. And you might be thinking this is an incredibly small and nitpicky example. And sure, it is small, it doesn't really change the experience that much, at least not for me. But I think it furthers my point that ambiguity is a core aspect of Silent Hill 2's identity, and that filling in the gaps of ambiguity in a narrative is inherently reinterpreting it to follow a new vision. And while Bloober generally preserved the ambiguous presentation when it comes to the lore and plot, the same cannot be said for other ambiguities I'll be discussing later. But before that whole thing, let's move on to number 2, visual abstraction. This creative choice is just how abstract they make the visuals in the enemy designs, character designs, environments, etc. The more abstract the visual is, the more ambiguity, and hence the more interpretation, such as Pyramid Head. But the less abstract, the more objective the visual becomes, such as Eddie's gut. Bloober was very faithful to the original game in this regard. The enemy designs are pretty much a one-to-one with no major visual changes to my understanding. Across the board, it just seems like they gave each enemy more detail while sticking to the original design. Well, except for Pyramid Boy. I'm going to talk a bit more in depth about how they changed his character in the next section, but I need to just get something off my chest real quick. Why did they make him a beefcake, What the hell, Bloober? I want Beefcake James, not Pyramid Head. What did you do to Beefcake James? Give me Beefcake James! No, but seriously, remember when the entire community was collectively bitching when the Silent Hill movie came out because they made Pyramid Head a thirst trap? I mean, there were bigger problems with his inclusion in that movie. But making him yoked out of his overalls was certainly a choice. While not as extreme, Bloober seems to have pressured Pyramid Head to get back on that sweet, sweet apple juice for a couple of cycles. Not sure why, to be honest. It doesn't make him scarier. If anything, it probably turns a lot of you sickos on. But besides the way they massacred my boy, Bloober pretty much stuck to the original like glue in visual abstract design. Even new areas they added had the same balance of concrete and abstract design the original did, such as the Abstract Daddy boss fight. I don't really have much time to go into how good the Abstract Daddy boss fight is, but the changes they made really just add on to the original design in very interesting ways. Okay, number 3. Character abstraction. Okay, this creative choice is how the characters behave and are presented. This can include facial expressions, body movements, and voice line delivery. A character can be presented in a way that makes them feel closer to reality or more detached, like something from a dream. The original Silent Hill 2 plays with these elements throughout the presentation of its characters to evoke a surreal atmosphere, blurring the lines between reality and the dream world. By far, I think this is the area of the original game's narrative that Bloober reinterpreted and changed the most. Let's begin with the big boy himself, Pyramid Head. In the original game, Pyramid Head had an almost mythical and nightmarish presence. Every time he'd come on the screen, you knew you were about to be subjected to some wild shit. He was awesome, because he really did feel like he came out of a fever dream. the same way the Mystery Man gives that same ominous aura in Lost Highway. Both truly feel like untouchable, ambiguously sinister and abstract forces tied to the guilt and subconscious of their hosts. In the remake, Pyramid Head feels different. The shift in presentation makes him feel less like a shadowy manifestation and more like a designed antagonist. Quite frankly, he reminds me of a slasher villain. I mean, just look at the way he walks now. Yeah, you're not fooling me, Bloober. That's just Jason Voorhees under that triangle hat, isn't it? In the original, he moved like he wasn't human, like an otherworldly spirit or creature. The way he moves in the original has always reminded me of this iconic scene in the classic J-horror movie, Cairo. In the original, I legitimately could not guess what this mad lad would do next. He felt so bizarre and ambiguously evil. One second, he's doing unspeakable things to a pair of mannequins. The next, he's leaving me alone and ignoring me after I mag dump him. And here I am, thinking we're cool, when all of a sudden I walk in on him getting freaky again, and he doesn't appreciate that one bit. Alright, I guess this is as good a time as any to talk about his censorship. I see a lot of people talking about the censoring of Pyramid Head's first cutscene, and honestly, I think it's a waste of time discussing the first one in that light. Sure, I personally think the original cutscene was more impactful because it's so sudden and therefore shocking, but if you ignore the presentation of the scene for a second, they really didn't censor much from the original. The exact same thing still happens, you just don't get a full-on view of it. And in my opinion, I think that works, because our minds are more readily able to fill in the gaps. In the original, you could clearly see there was nothing explicitly sexual going on. Emphasis on explicitly. But in the remake, it's much easier to interpret what he's doing as sexual abuse. So I really don't understand why people are crying over this scene's changes regarding censorship when it really isn't much different. And I especially don't understand how these same people are making a whole fuss over this first scene, but not a peep comes out of them about Pyramid Head's second cutscene. Because, yeah, this is straight up a completely different scene than the original game, and is very clearly toned down to remove any sexual implication. And before you start smashing your keyboards yelling at me about how Ito, the original creature designer for Silent Hill 2, disavowed any sexual interpretations of Pyramid Head, don't worry, I'm well aware of his tweets, and will address them at a later chapter of this video. Either way, at the very least it should be clear to anyone with more than one brain cell that this is a different approach and presentation to Pyramid Head's characterization. The abstraction that made Pyramid Head such an iconic figure has been changed quite a bit in the way that he behaves. That's not to say the nightmare surreal quality he used to have isn't there at all. They certainly kept some of it, but a lot of it just falls flat of the original for me, while other attempts honestly look great. I'm a particular fan of this shot. And just to be clear, while I can't say I'm fond of most of these Pyramid Head changes, my main point is to simply illustrate that Bloober's remake offers a different level of character abstraction than what the original did. Whether you're a fan of the new changes or not does not change the fact that the character abstraction is different in the remake. But speaking of differences, one of the most polarizing points of the original Silent Hill 2 story presentation has to be the voice acting delivery.
Mary? No, you're not.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
And honestly, it might be one of the more misunderstood aspects of the original by both critics and defenders alike. I often hear people say that the original voice acting was simultaneously flat and overdramatic. Some saying it's too goofy, and quite possibly the worst take I've ever heard about the dialogue, it's bad on purpose. I'm not a fan of implying universal quality standards on creative choices. Silent Hill 2's dialogue was never trying to be, quote, good voice acting. Which, to be more specific, these individuals are most likely referring to modern film line delivery when they say good. Rather than aiming for smooth, realistic dialogue, The original game leans heavily into a surreal and eerie style reminiscent of dreams. Yes, that's right, dialogue delivery can also be abstracted. This offbeat delivery isn't a failed attempt at good line delivery. It's a fundamental part of how the game creates a surreal dream atmosphere. In order to understand where Team Silent likely took inspiration for the dialogue delivery, we can once again turn our eyes to Lynch.
I just wanted to come here.
To Winkies?
This Winkies.
Okay. Why this Winkies?
It's kind of embarrassing.
Go ahead.
I had a dream about this place.
In Lynch's movies, his characters speak with strange pauses, flat or awkward intonations, and a lack of conventional emotional cues. Actors in his films often oscillate between flat delivery and sudden intense bursts of emotion. This style breaks the viewer's expectations of natural dialogue, creating a sense of discomfort and surrealism, immersing the audience in a world that doesn't follow the typical rhythms of speech and conversation.
Fuck! What are you looking at?
Nothing.
Don't you look at me, fuck! I shoot when I see the whites of the eyes.
It emphasizes a feeling of wrongness, making every line feel both distant and intimate, as though characters are speaking from a dream but with all the authenticity of reality. It's awkward, yes, but it's genuine. Silent Hill 2's original delivery is stylized similarly to blur the lines between reality and nightmare. For further example, you'll notice characters in the game use a similar dynamic range as in Lynch's works, where some lines are delivered flat, avoiding the conventional ways of expressing emotion.
Oh, it's you.
Yeah, I'm James.
Other lines are dynamic and dramatized.
Anyway! What do you mean, anyway? You don't sound very happy to see me. I was almost killed back there. Why didn't you try to save me?
Another example is how James's lines often sound passive, uncertain, and distant.
Did you find the person you're looking for?
Not yet. Her name's Mary. She's my wife.
This underplays his emotions, making his intentions and inner struggles feel almost unreadable on a first playthrough. Angela is another example. Her voice has a peculiar broken quality that intensifies her vulnerability.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I didn't mean to scare you.
Adding layers to her traumatic past and making her feel suspended between childhood and adulthood, which her character model also reflects. She is canonically 19, but her physical appearance seems closer to 30. This surreal and abstract presentation of the characters reminds the player that they're in a reality that is far from normal, but still very much deals with real emotions, real trauma, and real darkness. Another misunderstood aspect of the original's dialogue is the comedic delivery of some lines. It's a humor based in absurdity, where a character's flat or overdramatic delivery can turn a banal line into something comically strange.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
She said she was fine by herself.
Forget you.
Again, this approach to comedy and horror is very Lynchian. Lynch has a unique approach to comedy that hinges on the absurdity of the mundane and dark mixed with an odd detachment. I often hear this idea that comedy is in direct opposition to horror. If something is funny, then it's not scary. And if something is scary, it's not funny. Nay, I say, you can have both play along in harmony without having one dominating the other.
I'm very interested in humor. I'm interested in a humor that can sit next door to horror or fear or something more serious.
I mean, just look at these two scenes from Lynch's first feature-length movie, Eraserhead. Pretty surreal and nightmarish, right? Well, here's the scene that follows this one. Silent Hill 2 taps into the same disorienting balance of horror and comedy, where characters sometimes deliver lines or act in ways that feel comically out of place, yet strangely right. Eddie's character is a strong example of this. The original Eddie had this awkward mix of being comical, unstable, and tragic. He had some goofy goober moments that contrasted with his later descent into violence. I mean, even if you haven't played the original yourself, you've probably seen this pizza scene before.
How can you sit there and eat pizza?
This is probably one of the most ridiculous scenes in the series that isn't just a joke ending. I think it's easy to chalk this scene up as a failure of Team Silent and the voice actors in communicating a dramatic and serious scene because of how ridiculous it comes off. But that's exactly the problem with this way of thinking. You're assuming this scene is meant to be something other than ridiculous. No, the scene is ridiculous, and that's not a flaw. This scene is meant to disarm the player into seeing Eddie as this pathetic joke of a person who couldn't possibly be capable of harming others. The original does the exact same thing with James and Angela in the early parts of the story. While not doing so through humor, the game attempts to plant the seed in the player's head that James is a meek and passive person, and that Angela is a sensitive and damaged victim. This early presentation of their characters is what creates the surprise when you find out the violent past of each of these characters. The contrast makes the realization much more impactful, and the same goes for Eddie's humorous presentation. But you know what? No, you guys are right. This scene is too goofy for such a serious game such as Silent Hill 2. You know what would make this scene better? Some actual good and deeply celebrated modern voice actors.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
She said she was fine by herself.
Forget you.
Oh yes, that modernized Hollywood acting definitely improved the scene, guys. You were right all along. Fucking hell. But let's look at how the remake handles this same scene.
Eddie? Oh. You're, James. We met back at the apartment building. Yeah, I remember. I see that you didn't make it out yet. Yeah. I just didn't get around to it yet. Well, at least you got your appetite back. That's probably just Laura messing around.
The little girl? Laura, is that her name?
That's what she said.
I'm gonna go look for her. You coming?
Now you want me to come with you?
Never mind.
Pretty much a night and day difference when it comes to tone and presentation. Eddie's lines are delivered with a serious and grounded style, which presents his character in a more straightforward, almost tragic realism that wasn't in the original. He's presented less as a caricature on the edge of sanity, and more as a sympathetic character, stripped of the absurd humor that made this scene feel bizarre and surreal in the original. Of course, you still get some humor here with the awkward silence as Eddie licks his fingers, but I think it's pretty clear that the direction Bloober took is quite different here. To get rid of Eddie's humorous side is to fundamentally change who the character is. His character was originally designed to create an uneasy feeling, a balance between absurdity and menace. We can see the same design in Lynch's humor, but also the movie character I think Eddie is directly inspired by, Private Pyle from Full Metal Jacket. Both characters are essentially a mirror of each other, both in the ways they're ridiculed for their weight and their transition from comically pitiful to an unhinged menace. Eddie's confession scene itself feels like it was heavily inspired by Private Pyle's meltdown. Take a look.
Killing a person ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head, pow. Well, maybe he was right. Maybe I am nothing but a fat, disgusting piece of shit. But you know what? It doesn't matter if you're smart, dumb, ugly, pretty. It's all the same once you're dead. And the corpse can't laugh. You've been laughing at me all along, haven't you? Ever since we first met. I'll kill you, James!
Pretty damn similar, I think. Now let's look at how the remake handles this same scene.
Ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head.
Maybe he was right. Maybe I am nothing but a fat, disgusting piece of shit. But you know what? It doesn't matter if you're smart, dumb, ugly, pretty. It's all the same once you're dead. And a corpse can't laugh. But you've been laughing at me all along. Ever since we first met. But you ain't laughing now, are you?
Okay, that was honestly pretty damn funny. Can someone please make a version of this scene where it's the OG James rocking the shit out of Eddie? But yeah, I think the difference is night and day in presentation. But again, emphasis on different. If you prefer the remake over the original or vice versa, that's cool. But you have to acknowledge their different artistic approaches. Bloober seems almost embarrassed by the original's eccentricities, despite them being integral to the Lynchian formula that gave Silent Hill 2 its unique atmosphere. And I really felt this the most with how they reinterpreted the game show in Brookhaven Hospital.
Hi there, everybody! Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to another exciting edition of Trick or Treat! Here you either answer the questions correctly and win a great prize, or fail to answer correctly and receive the punishment. It all depends on you. And our lucky, or should I say unlucky challenger today is James. James Sunderland! Are you ready to play Trick or Treat?
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Welcome to another exciting edition of Trick or Treat, where you answer our questions correctly and win a prize beyond your wildest dreams. Or you fail to answer correctly and receive the punishment. It's all in the hands of our lucky contestant, James Sunderland. James, are you ready to play trick or treat?
Silent Hill witnessed a gruesome murder a few years back. A brother and sister were playing in the road when they were attacked and chopped into pieces with an axe.
Silent Hill witnessed a gruesome murder a few years back. A brother and sister were playing in the road when they were attacked and chopped into pieces with an axe.
Was the original version overacted? Yes. Was it cheesy? Yes, but that's exactly what gave it its unique surreal atmosphere. Remove the fog from Silent Hill and you're just left with Hill. If you remove the abstract surreal delivery of Silent Hill's story, you better have something good to replace it with. And while I was very disappointed in this little moment getting lost in translation, where I felt the most sore was with Maria. I know I've been vomiting hot takes this whole video, but I doubt there's a lot of people who prefer the new Maria performance over the original. Maria's performance was the most palatable performance to people who prefer modern acting from the original game. It still had strong elements of Lynchian delivery, namely being overly dramatic and switching between emotional highs and lows on a dime, but the original voice actress, Monica Taylor Horgan, struck a perfect balance in her performance. She delivered Maria with a kind of theatrical flair that swung between over-the-top seductive characterization and extreme vulnerability. One moment Maria would act like she's impersonating Betty Boop, and in an instant she'd flip to a sneering, accusatory tone.
I'm not your Mary.
This erratic, almost fragmented behavior fits with the background of her character and identity crisis so well. It left you questioning Maria's motives and ultimately the nature of her existence. Was she a real person, an echo of Mary, a manifestation of James's mind, much like the monsters, or is she all of these things at once? The original voice acting leaned into this surreal tone, making every interaction with Maria feel like stepping into a fever dream that isn't comedic like Eddie's interactions, or perplexing like Angela's, but rather deeply uncomfortable and sometimes downright terrifying. But in the remake, Maria's performance takes on a more grounded and contemporary approach.
My name is Maria. I don't look like a ghost, do I? See? Warm.
Sorry, I got confused.
This shift may appeal to those who prefer realism and subtler emotional beats, but it sacrifices that signature uncomfort that made her so memorable. This change in direction strips away the uncanny edge that made Maria such a compelling character to begin with, making her feel more predictable and less enigmatic. As I said before, if you're going to replace the abstract delivery of the dialogue, you better replace it with something as good or better. And this change in Maria's approach to dialogue was simply okay. No more, no less. The new performance is not bad by any modern standards, but it lacks the Lynchian soul of the original game. This shift in dialogue approach, prioritizing realism over abstraction, signals Bloober's modernized Hollywood approach. Bloober clearly took inspiration from the Last of Us games when creating this remake, not only inserting game mechanics such as the melee system, but also in the overall approach to the delivery of the narrative. The Last of Us is often held as a cinematic game with a movie-like delivery to its narrative, which is honestly a categorization that's painfully unspecific. Usually what these people mean when they call The Last of Us cinematic is they are referring to a specific form of modernized storytelling. Now listen, I don't have a film degree, okay? I don't know the entire history of film and how the modern trends of Hollywood have formed over the years, but it doesn't take a terabyte of pirated movies and thousands in student debt to see the difference between narrative delivery 50 years ago versus now. Modern cinema prioritizes clear and relatable characters and motivations, emphasis on clear, aka unambiguous. It prioritizes strong emotional cues which again paint an unambiguous picture of what the character is feeling. It prioritizes naturalistic or realism dialogue and acting. Modern Hollywood emphasizes acting styles that mirror natural human behavior, moving away from overly theatrical or surreal deliveries. In other words, it's dialogue that sounds closer to reality than a dream. Realism is the name of the game, and modern gaming is moving in a similar direction overall when it comes to more serious stories. I've heard people calling the remake the Netflix adaptation of Silent Hill 2, and what I described is basically the more specific version of that assessment. And again, that is not to say this new direction is bad, although I do think it's becoming oversaturated in gaming as of recent. But what I want you to take away from this video is to simply see that this modern approach to Silent Hill 2, the Netflix approach if you want to call it that, is not the same as the original approach to the narrative. Yes, the characters are the same. Yes, the plot is mostly the same. But the experience is completely different and should be considered different. I am tired of the sentiment that the abstract and bizarre narrative presentation of the original game was a failed attempt at good storytelling. The devs were very clearly going for a specific narrative approach, combining their biggest inspirations into their own original experience. This includes the lore ambiguity, the visual abstractions, the character abstractions, and even the goofy-ass comedy. It's easy to think these eccentricities make the game worse. I mean, even the original voice actor for James thought the famous pizza scene was too silly. Yet according to his words, the devs were adamant in its inclusion.
The directors, they knew what they wanted. They let us argue or challenge, well, me, some of the lines that I wasn't comfortable saying, but ultimately if they really wanted it, they got it. Like the dog ending was one that they definitely wanted. I was against doing that, as many of you know. And I thought the line about eating pizza and monsters was a little silly at the time, but turns out it's a fan favorite, so it shows you what I know.
All the design aspects we've discussed in this video weren't mistakes. They were parts of an intentional narrative approach. Modernizing a story does not necessarily mean you are improving the story. And man, I gotta ask, when the hell did remaking a game become remaking its story? This seems to be an increasingly popular trend from remakes that are highly acclaimed. Even the studio known for preserving the original experience of the games they remake has fallen into this trap to a certain extent. Stories do not need to be modernized to be improved. They can be modernized to give a different experience, but that's exactly it. They are different experiences. You cannot claim you've seen the original J-horror movie Ringu if you've watched the American remake and vice versa. The same goes for Silent Hill 2 and its remake. They both stand on their own. And I enjoy both for different reasons. I've been largely bringing up parts of the remake that I am not particularly fond of, but that does not mean that I dislike the new approach the remake takes. I actually like it quite a lot in some areas, despite how radically different it can be. I'm not going to discuss gameplay in this video outside of when it is relevant to the story, but I want to highlight that the changes to the level design throughout the game are generally outstanding. They took the foundations of the original and made something new and interesting. And largely, I think most of the game's reinterpretation of the story is like this. They took the foundations of the original and made something similar but overall new. In some places, they nailed the landing, and in others, not so much. But when they do nail the landing, I think it's awesome. So, let's give the remake its flowers real quick.
In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill.
James is a character, but not in the same way he was in the original. In the original, James was one of gaming's most enigmatic and intriguing protagonists, largely due to the deliberate ambiguity surrounding his mental state and his behavior. James is portrayed as a passive and often weak man. He often displays submissive and socially awkward body language when talking to others. He's incredibly clumsy and is not very proficient at ditching out violence. Even when he stomps on the enemies, he looks incredibly awkward and uncomfortable. But there's a subtle darkness to James we see sprinkled throughout the game that makes the player feel like there's something very wrong with him. There's a darkness in his eyes that points to an abyssal shadow deep within him. But it's difficult to read on a first playthrough, the way he dismisses certain characters once they are no longer useful to him.
Is it dangerous?
Maybe. And it's not just the fog either.
Okay, I got it. I'll be careful.
The way he treats characters apathetically, as if they're disposable.
James!
Mary? Oh, Maria. It's you. I thought you were... Sorry. Anyway, I'm glad you're alive.
And how, when put under pressure, he acts in deeply selfish ways, even if it means causing the death of those he claimed to care for.
Open up!
James is a confusing man, one latent with contradictions. How could a man who comes off as so meek and so submissive commit such a horrible and violent crime? He is always speaking of his wife with great longing and reverence, yet his actions speak differently. It makes you wonder what demons are hiding within everyday people. People you would never expect to be capable of murdering the supposed love of their life. It puts everyone on this earth under a microscope, including yourself. I think the save screen in the game shows this ambiguous side of James's character the best. The first time you approach a save state found at the bottom of a well near the beginning of the game, you might expect a pretty conventional save screen. But instead, what you're met with is this. I love this image. Like much of James's behavior in the early to mid-game before the reveal, the meaning of it recontextualizes as you learn more about James. I remember when I first played the game and saw this for the first time, I felt sorry for James. Coupled with these brutally metal lines describing what the red square is doing to him, I remember thinking the red that encapsulates James represents the town's grip and pull on his mind and sanity, making him believe and have hope that his dead wife is here, well and alive, only to pull him deeper and deeper into hell. But despite my sympathetic interpretation, I could never really shake off this feeling of wrongness. The way James stares at you with his black and dead eyes, even from the beginning, was unsettling. But once you know what James is truly capable of, you realize you're looking at the real James. You're looking at a reflection of his soul, his inner psyche, and it knows what he's done. Stare into the abyss, and the abyss will stare back. In the remake, James looks like a stray puppy dog who grew thumbs and learned how to use FaceTime. And it's honestly not a bad thing necessarily, because James is a completely different character in this remake. He is presented in a much more sympathetic and relatable light than the original. Remake James has emotional intelligence, and often uses it to relate to other characters, or try to diffuse hostile situations. I think the new ending Bloober added is a perfect example of this shift in James's character. I'm going to be showing and discussing a new ending exclusive to the remake called the Stillness ending, so skip to this timestamp to avoid spoilers. Alrighty, get your tissues ready. This ending is heavy.
I tried. I really did, but I can't go on without you. I can't forgive myself for what I've done.
I know. What's wrong, honey?
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Will you wait for me?
James. I've always been waiting for you.
The new ending is simply excellent. It is a great way to reinterpret the original tone and presentation of the game while offering a fresh and compelling angle to the original that simply would have never fit in the original. James was never this expressive in the original. He never cried or broke down, which works for the style and presentation Team Silent was inspired by. But it works amazingly in this new realistic presentation that James would have these type of emotional moments. In the original game, James's emotional restraint aligned perfectly with the understated, ambiguous narrative that Team Silent crafted. This reserved demeanor created an air of mystery and forced players to infer his inner struggles through subtle cues and moments where his character would drastically shift. It was this lack of overt expression that amplified the surreal and detached atmosphere of the game, making the eventual revelations about James's guilt and actions all the more jarring. In the remake, however, the decision to depict James breaking down and showing raw, unfiltered emotions feels authentic to Bloober's more modern and cinematic approach. This reinterpretation doesn't undermine the original, but rather recontextualizes James's journey, making it more relatable and grounded. While the original leaned into the player's imagination to fill in emotional gaps, the remake presents these emotions directly, creating a connection that feels more personal and grounded in reality. This makes James a more sympathetic figure, and his moments of vulnerability add new layers to his character, offering players a different lens through which to view his guilt and remorse. Now, it's within your right to prefer one approach to the story over the other. I certainly prefer the original, more dreamlike narrative presentation myself. But if you prefer this more modernized take on the story, that's completely fine. But we have to acknowledge they are different experiences. Modern gaming remakes often carry an implicit message. They present themselves as upgrades meant to replace the original. This approach suggests that the original, while cherished, is seen as outdated or flawed in some fundamental way that needs correction. The idea is that with advanced graphics, polished mechanics, and modern storytelling techniques, the remake becomes the superior version, the new standard. And sure, that might be true for gameplay mechanics, but I don't care enough to enter that conversation. What I care most about Silent Hill 2 is not the gameplay, but the story. And like I've been saying this whole video, modernizing a story is not upgrading it. But some might argue, what if it's the original creators themselves who decide to update their work? Isn't that an inherent improvement? No. This idea leans on the faulty assumption that the artist always has the last say on what their piece represents. If you need the artist's later life musings or revisions to make sense of a piece, then you're missing the point. What happens when the creator can't speak for themselves anymore? Is the meaning of their art suddenly locked away? Unsolvable because they're not around to spoon feed the meaning to you? Moreover, what happens when an artist decides to revise their work, shifting their perspective over time, maybe because their original work was scaring off the hoes? Does that make the previous intentions of the author objectively wrong? The reason I feel pushed to even talk about this larger philosophical discussion on revising art is that there's a narrative that this remake is fixing the mistakes of the original. Namely, one of the big supposed mistakes is the sexual behavior and characterization of Pyramid Head in the original. Ito, the creator of Pyramid Head, has been walking back on Pyramid Head's sexual characterization even before this remake came out. But it seems this revision has been completed with the changes to Pyramid Head's first boss fight. Listen, I'm not going to waste our time going back and forth on what Ito's original intentions with Pyramid Head moaning in my ear was in the original. Only Ito knows what his intentions were, and it's his choice to be honest with us or not. My main point is that Ito is just a person, as fallible as any of us, and can change his mind on the meaning of Pyramid Head on a dime. He could come out and say Pyramid Head is James's mother. Would we then be forced to align our interpretations with his revised take, no matter how far it strays from the work's established resonance? If you're stuck believing that the artist's current thoughts define the true meaning of their work, you're building on a foundation of sand, an inconsistent standard that you are claiming is objective. What do you do when the creator dies? Do you cling to the last tweet or interview as gospel? What if those statements contradict their earlier ones? Or what if their later thoughts were driven by external pressures, market trends, or a personal crisis? What if those thoughts contradict the collaborative input of other creators involved in the work? Silent Hill 2's development was a fusion of ideas from various individuals, each with their own interpretation of what the work represented. If one member of the team were to voice an interpretation that contradicts another, which perspective is correct? Those who argue that art has an objective truth when it comes to metafiction must confront an inherent contradiction when considering the artist's final say. Imagine a scenario where you, as an interpreter, come to a conclusion using your objective tools, only for the artist to come out and say you're dead wrong. Now you have two supposedly infallible sources of truth in direct conflict. Which one is it? You can't have it both ways. You either cling to the artist's words and let their fluctuating whims dictate metafiction meaning, or you acknowledge that art belongs to the space between its creator and its audience, an ever-evolving conversation where multiple interpretations can stand. Treating the artist's word as the definitive guide undermines the interactive experience of art. Silent Hill 2's story has stood the test of time because of what players have unearthed in its layers. That's what gives its longevity and weight. You don't need to wait for an artist to spoon feed you meaning or pray that they don't change their minds. Art transcends that. Silent Hill 2 dares you to engage with its ambiguity, not to sit back and wait for someone to explain it to you. And this is precisely where Bloober's approach to the Silent Hill 2 remake starts to make more sense. The small changes to lore, the changes to dialogue, the straight-up additional story through the new endings, even the way they changed Pyramid Head now begin to make sense. Given the reverence and respect Bloober has shown for the original game, it's clear that their intention wasn't to revise or replace the original, but to create something that could stand alongside it. In many ways, this remake feels less like a retelling and more like an echo, a sequel of sorts that builds off of the original's foundations. But I can see you don't believe me. Let's look at the evidence that Bloober's supposed remake is actually a sequel. There's these little moments sprinkled throughout the game known as echoes according to the remake's trophy list. They depict the aftermath of key moments from the original Silent Hill 2. These moments would be easy to chalk up as Easter eggs or just nostalgic fan service, but I don't think their purpose is quite so one-dimensional. Some of these echoes, admittedly, could easily be labeled as just a reference.
This town's full of monsters. We could just sit here and eat pizza.
But as you progress through the game, some of them begin to reference events from the original game as if they already happened. Take these apartment echoes for instance. That looks like the same puzzle James completed in the original. But that might just be a clever way of showing why the puzzles are different in this game, because the old one's broke, I guess. But what about this one? That's the same monster that Pyramid Head was getting freaky with and devouring in the original. And it's already dead, and the water is drained from the staircase, as if the original cutscene already happened. We see a similar echo at the hospital where you can see the same fence James was thrown onto already dented after his fall. Although I'm pretty sure the fence entirely fell in the original, but that just seems like a bit of an oversight. You can even find James's original map he used included with all his notes. You can also get an echo of the original entrance to Heaven's Night, and this is where I was fully convinced these were not just Easter eggs.
What is it?
Nothing. Just deja vu.
The characters themselves are commenting on these echoes of the past as if they've already experienced them. And this is not just exclusive to these echoes. Characters have added dialogue that reinforces this theory. Look at this moment where Maria almost seems aware that she's about to walk into her death.
What's wrong? I thought you wanted to get out of here.
I know. It's just... something doesn't feel right.
Come on. It's gonna be fine.
So that was a fucking lie.
Or what about Eddie's new dialogue?
You'll die here, James. You'll squirm and squeal and cry like a little girl. And then you'll just curl up and die. And it's gonna feel great! Just like before.
While he could be referring to people he's killed before here and not James, the fact that all the corpses in this area are of James could suggest Eddie has regained his memory of killing James in different cycles. It's ambiguous here, but still an interesting piece of evidence. Or what about this new scene with Angela, where she says this?
Are you feeling better?
This place is different from what I remember. I guess things never really stay the same, do they?
These moments are even supported by the behavior of the monsters. Pyramid Head in particular seems more aggressive and impatient. He even knows when and where James will be exiting the hospital roof. It's almost as if he's trying to rush James to his inevitable realization. These moments transcend callbacks to the original, but rather they suggest the idea that Silent Hill's characters might be conscious participants in their own cyclical fate, doomed to remain in this town which serves as some form of purgatory or never-ending loop. These characters going through the same cycle over and over again. The same way we, the player, are going through the same journey over and over again. Not just by starting a new game or getting different endings, but also by playing the remake after the original. It seems to suggest the remake is just another cycle that these characters are experiencing. This thematic loop is actually not new to Silent Hill as a series. The town has always been a place where time and reality blur, where past traumas are replayed endlessly, trapping both the living and the dead in cycles of suffering. In the first Silent Hill, the bad ending was an infinite loop where Harry's death signaled a restart. It's as though the events we experience were just one loop in a continuous nightmare. This idea of endless cycles is paralleled by the game's major influences, Lost Highway and Jacob's Ladder. Lost Highway has a very similar looping ending as Silent Hill 1. The ending of the movie shows events that we, the audience, only got glimpses of in the beginning of the film. Frank is caught in an endless cycle of guilt and denial, creating and recreating realities to avoid facing his sins. He keeps trying to run away on the Lost Highway, only to meet the same gruesome fate over and over again. In Jacob's Ladder, screenwriter Bruce Joe Rubin described the horrors of realizing that hope is hell's final torment, that life is a dream that ends over and over with the final truth. that life was never real, and that we are all creatures trapped in eternal suffering and damnation. Similarly, PT, Kojima's take on Silent Hill, utilized the concept of repeating descending hallways to depict a cyclical purgatory. If Silent Hills would have been released from the clutches of Konami, I'm sure it would have delved into the cyclical theme much more with the different realities. Even in the original Silent Hill 2, a very popular community theory was that James and the other characters of Silent Hill were trapped in a cycle. The biggest piece of evidence being the corpses of James found throughout the town, potentially being different versions of James from different cycles. The echoes of the past in the remake not only remind James of what happened before, but also suggest that he, and even perhaps the town, is trapped in this eternal cycle. This sense of repetition, hence that Bloober's remake exists within Silent Hill's cyclical nature, where past sins and unresolved guilt resurface over and over again. By incorporating elements that suggest the events are repeating, Bloober's remake goes beyond the role of being a simple modern upgrade that most remakes fall into. Put simply, the remake isn't just a straightforward retelling, it's an iteration of a cycle, another interpretation of the dream that is Silent Hill 2. In the end, the Silent Hill 2 remake is not a replacement for the original, it's a reinterpretation, a companion piece that offers a different take on the story, and should not be considered an enhancement or replacement, at least as it pertains to the story. You nerds can debate over the gameplay all you want, I could care less. If you like the remake, you really owe it to yourself to play or at least watch the original. I'm not a fan of how inaccessible Konami has made the original games. While Bloober's intentions were clearly not to replace the original, Konami seems to have less positive intentions. By making the classic Silent Hill titles so difficult to access, they're pushing this remake as if it is a replacement. With the amount of blows game preservation has been taking recently, it's truly a shame to see the modern trend of remakes following in this destructive direction. The 7 Seas have never looked so inviting. Yar har. You are a pirate! So, do whatever you have to do to experience Team Silent's original masterpiece, because whether you see Bloober's take as a respectful homage, a modernized retelling, or even a kind of spiritual sequel, the fact remains that it provokes discussion and interpretation. And that's exactly what hooked me on the original Silent Hill 2 in the first place. The beauty of Silent Hill lies in the ways it forces us to confront its possible meanings. And the remake, by reimagining and reframing its original parts, has us questioning it all over again. The cycle continues. Thank you, dear viewer, for entertaining the ravings of a madman once again. In my next 3 videos, I'll be diving into the horrors of Elden Ring. And believe it or not, there's so much horror in that game it needs 3 videos. So to be notified when those videos are uploaded, go ahead and subscribe. Until next time, dear viewers, I will see you in your dreams.
I'll see you.